unentweinig. Beschadet lernt den Rambam, wo sonst nicht gefunden, in der Dina Allah auf Pinil. Also der Dämmel, der Rambam ist sehr voll. Und das ist verbunden mit vielen Rapporten des Lagash. In dem ist der Keller, der Lehrer wird erschienen und hat nur in dem Navi. Und das wird durch das, was da im Dämmel ist, wird erschienen in dem Navi, was am Ende ist. Was der erschienen, Pel Bechol Harische Leben. Bitte, Abschasse wird erschienen in Nechschule von dem Navi. Und der Ewigkeit war Schasse, so ein Doppelgusch, ein Leben, der Kajitze, und der Macht erschienen in dem Leben. Das ist erschienen in einem Leben, das gewinnt der beherzigt noch im Zusammen. Aber wie gesagt, der Ewigkeit war Schasse, in der Samen im Tründe. Am Gita Schock, den Abend, Besen, noch im Schiene, ist er noch das Mispachit, und er liegt nur, Safe, Kollel, als der Gast. Nicht mehr mit der Nacht, als der Ewigkeit der Schatten wird. Nicht als Gefäße, David gezählt. Und das Gefäße von dem Rambam tut das zu, bevor Avim Shabbat. Hat das getan, und der Kotzen, was gelernt hat, die Allah in dem Rambam. Wir kommen, die David Rambam, aber besuchen Mittel. Viele Schelenisch war mit. Also Pel sein, beim Nochum, es soll werden Rambam oder nächstes sein, wie mit der Rambam. Die Seele von der hat Millionen, was ist ein Gott, klar auch nicht mehr. Eisling, Simchol, ich mache schon Tee. Aber es kam, wie kann uns das Siyum Harambam kommen? Und das die Kehle kommt, schon mal wegkommen. Also ich sage der Rambam, Segmen bepasst zu der Vater, aber das Werde von der Wust als zweiten Nieden, Pinto Bema Azov. Der Zentrum, was mit der Stuhl, wird das Amis und Azov, wo sie Polosse, bis waren der Mäßig der Helle, wie Nimo der Rambam, oder Mechadische Nimo der Rambam. Bis waren der Welt an den Heulen, was ja noch in uns. Okay, wir tun wir Regler haben, ich bin auf Mussum, es geht nicht Israel, wir setzen das Pascht. Aber man macht das Tummel, aber man geht machen, Siyum Harambam morgen, oder übermorgen. Der Kajitze, was ist gleich, wie man sagt, wenn du Tummel lebst, noch, wenn man die was Business, ob das nicht gewusst. Was ist der Tummel, bei mehr Schienen, wenn was wechselt war? Und vielleicht denkt das Schreibe, was uns da Schreibe ist. Ich war noch ein bisschen Masel, aber ich habe schon gesagt, ich habe gesagt, und ich habe ich war sicher gesagt, was das Schreibe ist. Und der Pari kommt, und die was lebensliebische Tia, Stott oder Stepp, oder Chub, oder Besaknes, die Kajitze, das haben sich nicht mit Staat, nicht gemacht allein als die, oder Kopf ohne gestartet werden, in der Siyum Harambam, in der zweiten Ort, ist Leor, Menachem, der Emes, mit Tee, wie Jatze, mit allen Dutzenden Schenis, was wir rechnen Tee, haben soll nachher Kopf ohne Massiv nichts. Und dieser soll bleiben, dieser Masker, dieser da bei jeder Siyum, dieser Bali Mollet, und so letzt den bis am Ende fließt sie durch, es legen Mollet, und so letzt mit Tufta. In Avodah Salam, in Asoga Salam, in Nakash, in in Bundeswehr, selbst was wir tun. Die Bayern soll tun, wir werden in seinem Leben, das soll sein Glory. Wir sollen das abdrucken mit Passen sein. Die Passen sein, das zwischen die, was sich nicht starten werden in den Siyum. Der Lehrer dann sehen, das bringt in Kollel, werden das Beste. Wir können beweisen, der Balaboste, der Früh sein oder die Kinder. Also hat sie gelernt, das Siyum und er gesagt, dann und der Minium hat es so gedrückt. Und was soll der Sonnabdruck, der Torschladruck, der Truadruck, der Kajitze sein, und das ist echt eigentlich nicht gemacht. Schaßen wir erst mit Blink bei, da gibt viele Themen, das nicht, Agini Shalinish, the Lord protected the Punaris Kumanatiel, he showed the Bas the Charisma, the same relation as Agini Demi Tadas. The Lord got to say, as a spell test, it's verschiedene Richtstoff. Oder Quelle, oder Kontakte, dann schätzt man, dass das Spiel wirklich Josh. Wo der Fall kommt, und wie bald an der Erde sich bekannt beginnt, die da nicht eine Gehme passt, sondern der man sie gewinnt, jener man sie gewinnt. Jeder hat sich schon achten, dass das Welt seine Erzählung lebt. Und Schaß hat sich in Gruppe reingeschlagen, dass da nach Hitlerschuld, dass das jeder sich verstehen, aber Schaß mitmachen als sie. Ist eine sichere Sache, dass die Zukunft, das ist das Ding, von dem Rambam, ist eine sichere Sache, dass die Zukunft in den Kirchen, und die was uns das gestattet sein in sie, Kirche zu teilen wie Niedrigkeit bis klar, und Kirche zu dem Rambam bis klar. Wie zu der Woche verstehen, Rambam, und die Frage noch eben kommen, mit deren Konflikt, und die kennt sie nicht. Was mit damals soll, Akiva zu sein, nicht nachdem ihr die Bücher, den ihr an Kontos mit Pakistan, voll eben guckt, so bekommen wir hier die Monate, dass dem bis am Ende ist, dass sie kommen sich zusammen, Alin, Erdbeeren zusammen. Und Kavanos mit zu, sollte mich nicht noch, und dann mich das so bedacht. Aber Schaß ist so in zwei Jiden, was nicht berodiert bei Israel in die Tiere, wenn jemand war in Kosten der Form von der Mensch. Und der Mensch war Jagd, war weit. Und der Welt verschrieben in der Seife, die kommen, Regina dabei und richtig schnell. Rodum mit der Monte Frie, ich denke mit Eis an Rambam, was der Schreiber an der Moske, die Figuren selber setzen, die Verloschen Arcadien und das Mountain gewesen, voll Schad Figuren, die Konschreiben noch in Jahren, Figuren, das sind Verloschen Arcadien. Oder dort sind die Wolflieds, die Verloschen Arcadien, und für den ist zu tun. Also wissen sein, dass der Seepische lebt. Und das ist die Tugmas des Menschen, was die Menschen hat, Menschen, die kommen zu Menschen, und der Zeit hat der Moski, in der Ehe Kehl, was der Voll hat Kehl Kulo, wir haben Gott Hefe dem Siyum, hat dem Siyum, und der Ende kommt die Streu, und das ist dann der Siyum, und Chavish, und Schtele, und die Kehl, und die Kolla Kehl Kulo, Kehl, Über der, na sehr es bessein sein Korn, die stehen in der Rambam. Und das ist dieses, dann noch mit der machen, die stehen nach Gott. Mit der Sunde, wie es da sein, die Morrische Tehen, und der Sunde, das die Besiege. Wir sind ein bisschen erlebt und überrascht. Immer schön machen, die werden Begegnungs machen, bis am Nächsten, bis am Ende schon. Es sieht ja jemand mit relativ schwer, beachtet vieles. Aber wie ist, genau so wie das ist, und die Fußballkonika bringt, was auch wirklich durch. Und wie man denkt, man das so durchnehmen, den Kolb, schon eine Fuhle, zu Lust, die haben wir
Follow up the time runner stated at four tired members of the house were generous enough to agree, share with us their experience of learning Rambam and hopefully give us some inspiration. So I'd like to start off with asking Ruben Vincent to come up and share his work.
Second Lebanon War. A place called Bint Jabil. A special unit of the Golani Brigade, 51st Battalion, deployed in this area in Bint Jabil, where there is a very big stronghold of Hezbollah. The special unit identify a certain compound area where they believe that this is the stronghold of Hezbollah. Unfortunately, it was an ambush. And sadly, many of these soldiers lost their lives within minutes. Many injured and wounded, and the rest fighting for their lives. A commander of another special unit of the Golani called unit egos, which were specially trained in anti-terror and guerrilla warfare. The commander, his name is Roy Klein. Some of you may have heard of him. He is tasked to take his men and save the wounded, free the soldiers that are still there, and sadly rescue the bodies that Hezbollah doesn't take them. As Roy Klein and his men are making their way towards this compound where his brothers are in ambush, a grenade is thrown towards Roy Klein's unit. He realizes that he doesn't have enough time to throw the grenade back, and he doesn't have enough time to tell his men to run. In an act of literal Kiddush Hashem, he jumps on top of the grenade, taking his life, saving the lives of brothers. Second in command is a young soldier named Yonatan Yoni Sitbon. He tells in his book, Under Fire, that when Roy Klein, his commander, was killed, he had to take over as commander. He quickly mobilizes his soldiers. He starts to make his way towards his ambushed brothers. As he's making his way towards the compound, he's faced at a big disadvantage. He's taking heavy fire from Hezbollah militants from above, and he and his men are on the bottom of the hill. They teach you in the IDF training that when you're being shot at from above, your natural instincts are to freeze, is not to move. Your natural instinct, when fire is coming all around you, you want to stay still. You want to stay in the same spot. You don't want to move. But what they teach you in training is that you need to override your natural instincts. And you must keep moving. You must mobilize and you have to move, or else you're sitting in certain death. Yoni Sitbon is taking heavy fire from above. His commander just took his life in front of him. He has brothers dead all around him. And the light flashes before his eyes. He says to himself, this is it. The image of his wife, his kid flashed before him. He's about to give up. At that moment, he remembers halacha and Rambam. He remembers a halacha and Rambam that those of you who are studying a few chapters a day will just learn. Halacha and Rambam, Hilchos Nochum, at the end of chapter 7. And if someone's in the throes of war, he must remember that he's fighting the war of Hashem. Believe and have faith in Hashem that he will succeed. He must not think of his wife nor his kids. The only thing he must think about is the war. And Yoni Sitbon tells his book Under Fire that though that moment when he remembered that Rambam inspired him, he overrode his natural instincts to stay put, and he remembered his training that he learned as a Golani soldier. He quickly mobilized, got his men together, made his way towards the house, saved his brothers, ended up becoming war hero. We're all in a war. We're all in a personal war. Like the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 9 in Tanya, we're all in a war. Personal, emotional war, spiritual war, intellectual war, and even a global war. We're all in a war to bring Mashiach. And the one thing that gives you the ammunition, the inspiration to succeed is the koyach of learning Torah. But not just any Torah. Learning the Mishneh Torah la Rambam, where the Rambam covers Kol HaTorah Kula from beginning to the end. Not only is it cover the entire Torah, it's written in a way that even the most simple person can understand. It's written for the greatest scholars, so they tell me, and written for the most simple people, that every person can learn and understand. Life is a war. There's darkness, there's struggles, there's pain, there's anxiety, stress, worry. But when a person has by his side the koyach HaTorah, the limud HaTorah of the Rambam every single day, what more can you ask that the Rebbe, the Nasi, the Melech gave you something that you can do every day? What more can you ask for? This is what gives Ahid Koyach, the darkness that we're in, to bring light and to succeed in this war. Just as the Rambam starts off so beautifully with first believing in a one God, and then proceeds to go through Kol HaTorah Kula, every single mitzvah, and explains. Then finishes off Hilchos Melech HaMashiach. Perhaps the Rambam is telling us that the Yid, its foundation, is Emunah and Bitachon. And then he proceeds to learn Kol HaTorah Kula. It will end becoming a Mashiach.
Thank you, Reb Riven, for the very warm, inspirational words, helping us understand that Rambam is accessible to all. I'd like to now ask Dr. Daniel Arno to share with us. Thank you. About 5 months ago, I was at a Fabrengen. It was a very small, very intimate, but very, very powerful Fabrengen. It was with Rabbi Moshe New from Montreal. And it started as a very intimate Dominion Fabrengen. And then at 11:30 at night, he decided to call Rabbi Glick, who came and joined us. And then at midnight, he decided to call Rabbi Corona, who came and joined us. And we all sat there for praying till well past 2 o'clock in the morning. It was one of those soul-changing Fabrengen. Everyone was absolutely glued to their seat and no one was going anywhere. The Rabbi New said, all right, guys, I've had enough. It was a Monday night, a school night, a work night, whatever you want to call it. Everyone had babies waking up in a few hours' time, but no one was going anywhere. And I remember thinking, how do I take this Fabrengen with me? How do I take the connection I'm feeling at this time with me? How do I take this awe, this inspiration with me? And literally moments later, Rabbi New started talking about the importance, how the Rebbe emphasized that everyone should be learning Rambam.
And so that was it. That was how I was going to take the Farbrengen with me. I'm going to come back to this Farbrengen in a minute. But I just want to mention that this actually wasn't the first time I was learning about the Rambam. I first came across the Rambam in med school as Maimonides. And I'm sure you're aware he was an extremely prolific doctor, physician, philosopher, scientist. But maybe you don't know just the extent of the power and the influence he's had on the history of science and medicine. He has written about 15 to 20 books on medicine. Everything. Things like a book on how to treat hemorrhoids, how to treat lung issues. He categorized every single poison and treatment known at the time and wrote a textbook on it in 4 different languages, all within the one book. That it was a universal guide for anyone to be able to see a poison and understand its treatment. He wrote a book on depression. He was the physician to the king of Egypt at the time, the Sultan. And the Sultan's son had depression. So he wrote him a book on how to manage depression called, it's translated in English, you can buy it on Amazon, it's called The Guide to Good Health. And there he outlines a way to live that will improve your body, that will improve your mind. He wrote books on intimacy. He wrote an expansive collection of books on medicine. He wrote commentaries on Hippocrates, on Galen, all the greats. He basically synthesized all the understanding of medicine to that point of time and expressed it in writing. What's amazing is that about 2 years ago, a group of researchers wanted to figure out how much of the principles that the Rambam gave us in medicine, in science, over 820, 50 years ago, how much of those principles still hold true today? This was published in a journal 2 years ago. A group of researchers led by actually a Sydney researcher, Isidore Siegel. And what he did was he found all of the Rambam's recommendations, dietary recommendations, across his works, and they found about 20 dietary recommendations. And then they compared those recommendations to all of the latest guidelines on diet that you can find in medicine. And there are 3 main dietary guidelines that are the world leaders of dietary guidelines. They are the American Heart Association dietary guidelines, they are the World Health Organization dietary guidelines, and the Dutch dietary guidelines. So these authors compared all of the Rambam's recommendations on diet to all of these latest guidelines. But not only that, the current, I guess, most scientifically sound diet is the Mediterranean diet. Now, science is very, very limited on its understanding of which is the best diet and the healthiest diet for us. But according to the limited research we have available, the Mediterranean diet seems to be, at least compared to the low-fat diet, the best at reducing cardiovascular disease, stroke, and heart attacks. So they compared the Rambam's dietary recommendations to the Mediterranean diet. In the study, they've got 4 columns. The Rambam's 20 recommendations, then comparing it to the American Heart Association guidelines, comparing it to the Dutch guidelines, comparing it to the World Health Organization guidelines, and comparing it to the Mediterranean diet. Of the 20 recommendations that the Rambam gave on diet 850 years ago, there was complete 100% concordance amongst all 4 of those guidelines, with 5 of those recommendations. And for 12 of those recommendations, there was concordance with at least 1, 2, or 3 of those guidelines. So, for example, the ones that they all agree on were things like the Rambam recommended minimizing your salt intake. The Rambam recommended when eating wheat to eat the wheat with its fiber, in other words, with the husk, in other words, the whole wheat. So all 4 guidelines are in total agreement with those. And then there were 12 that some agreed with and others just didn't mention. For example, eating eggs. So 2 of the guidelines say, yes, eggs are good, and 2 of them don't mention them. And another one that the Rambam recommended was not to eat processed meat. We know that the World Health Organization about 8 years ago took the stance that we should avoid all processed meats. Well, the Rambam recommended that 850 years ago. And again, that was the one There wasn't concordance with all the guidelines, but at least 12 health organizations. So what that means is that there was 85% concordance with what the Rambam suggested we eat 850 years ago to what the best science, the best understanding, the best research tells us today, which I think is remarkable. There were 3 that didn't accord with any guidelines, and there's various interpretations as to why Rambam recommended them. For example, not to eat fruit, to minimize fish, which we all know, according to our guidelines, don't agree with that, but there are various interpretations as to why Rambam said that for specific reasons. But the Rambam didn't stop there. He recommended other incredible things which today are so obvious, but they haven't always been obvious throughout the course of the past 800 years. He recommended vigorous exercise regularly. Again, 50 to 80 years ago, if you had a heart attack up the shoulder, the way they treated you was what's called prolonged bed rest. They just put you in hospital and you lie there for months and months on end because they were scared that exercise was so bad for your heart. The chas v'sholom was going to make the heart attack worse. Now we know that vigorous exercise is one of the best things you can do for your heart. The Rambam said after eating, don't do any vigorous exercise. Walking and slow, fast-paced walking is okay. Again, now we know 800 years later that when you eat, there's an increase in blood flow to your digestive system, about 200% increase in blood flow to your digestive system. And that if you do vigorous exercise, that blood flow will be shunted away from your stomach into your muscles to feed your muscles oxygen, and you won't be able to digest the foods that are given to you. I find it remarkable, considering that about 50 to 80 years ago, any of the treatments that were considered mainstream medicine compared to now are almost entirely backwards. Yet these recommendations by Rambam 820 years ago have an 85% concordance with the top thoughts and the thinking of the physicians today. But that's not really the point of what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is what's even more amazing is how the Rambam ended up becoming a physician. See, the Rambam had a challenging life. He faced challenge after challenge after challenge. He was born in Cordova, and at the age of 10 to 13, there was an extremist Islamic group which took control of the region, the Almohads, and he was forced to flee with his family. For 11 years, he didn't have a permanent place to live as he was fleeing the Almohads. Him and his family settled in Morocco, and shortly after, the Almohads came to Morocco, and again, he was forced to flee. The Almohads had a new philosophy in Islam. 500 years after Muhammad, they said, everything that he said about tolerance doesn't apply anymore. Now you either have to accept Islam, or you get killed, or you have to flee the country. So the Rambam chose to flee. He ended up settling with his family in Egypt, in Cairo. And very, very soon after, he lost his father, his wife, and his children. But he still had his brother, David. And he had this agreement with his brother. The Rambam, his brother David was a merchant, and they made an agreement. David would go and make sales and take whatever money that David and the Rambam had and multiply it through selling goods or buying goods. And the Rambam could sit and learn and focus on Torah all day. About 7 years after he lost his family, he lost his brother as well. His brother was carrying all of the Rambam's money and valuables at the time, and his ship sunk in the Indian Ocean. And so now, the Rambam lost his wife, he lost his father, he lost his children, he lost his brother, he lost his ability to learn Torah without having to worry about the pursuit of income and livelihood. But not only that, he now had to fend for his brother's wife and his brother's daughter. He actually writes about this dark period in his life in a letter. And in that letter, he mentioned that for an entire year, he basically couldn't leave his bed. He was in such a state of depression, such a state of shock, that he couldn't leave his bed. What's amazing is that somehow the Rambam was able to overcome this and become one of the greatest scholars of all time, one of the greatest physicians of all time, one of the greatest contributors in history to science, to maths, to astronomy, to philosophy, to medicine. And when I think about how Rambam was able to do that, I guess no one really knows, but if we take his Mishneh Torah, we know that the Rambam was very, very meticulous with how he wrote his works. There's a letter that he wrote when he was 27 called the Igeris Hashmad. There was a sage who was basically admonishing the Jews who were agreeing to convert to Islam when they were being forced to by the Almohads. He was saying, this sage was saying the Jews shouldn't do that and that they're apikoresim. This angered the Rambam very much. And he wrote a very famous letter when he was 27 years old, admonishing this sage for saying such things. And in that letter, he writes that before you put pen to paper, you need to think about what you're writing 1,000 times. So we can understand that this is how the Rambam treated all of his works. Therefore, we can understand the Rambam was meticulous in the order, in the wording, in the structure in which he created his Mishneh Torah and his Sefer Mitzvahs. Now, there's a principle, there's an axiom in Torah that within the first moment of something, the totality of the thing can be found. The famous example is when an architect thinks of a building, within that first moment of thought, within the first conception of that idea is the totality of the idea. Or in biology, we know that when we're created, at the first moment of conception is determined almost everything about our physical stature. At the first moment of conception, the first infinitesimal microsecond when the genes are being fused from your mom or your dad and your dad, it's deciding your hair color, your eye color, how tall you're going to be, the state of your arteries, how big your nose is going to be, which is good news for some and bad news for others. So in the first moment, it contains the totality of the thing. We know on Rosh Hashanah, the entire face of the year is determined on the first day of the year. The Vilna Gaon says that the entire Torah is condensed within the one word Bereshit. Why? Because the first moment of something contains the totality of the thing. So what did Rambam decide to put as his first mitzvah? We're going to read it tomorrow. It's emunah. To believe that Hashem exists and Hashem created the world and Hashem has an impact and an influence on everything that happens in our lives. And so while I don't know how the Rambam turned this state of depression, I've got an English translation of his letter here while he was in that state. On the day I received that terrible news, I felt ill and remained in bed for about a year, suffering severely from sore boil, fever, and depression. So how did he come from that state to author the unbelievable Mishneh Torah, to compose his medical works, to become one of the most prolific physicians? Saladin, he was the physician to the palace of Egypt. Saladin was the Sultan, one of the most famous figures in Muslim history, and the Rambam was his personal physician. And so maybe the Rambam felt that emunah was the abiding principle by which all of the mitzvahs are contained within. The Talmud in Makos 24b says that Moshe gave the Jewish people 613 mitzvahs. King David condensed them all into 11. Micah condensed them all to 3. Isaiah condensed them all to 2. And Habakkuk established that the entire 613 mitzvahs really condensed into one mitzvah. And that was the tzaddik be'emunaso yihya, that a tzaddik lives by his emunah. So it seems that the Talmud, and maybe the Rambam, in the way he structured his Mishneh Torah, believed that Amunah was the fundamental principle. That was what drove him from the dark depths to his successful career after. So back to my Fabrangen. About 6 months ago, Hashem put me in a certain situation, and really, if it wasn't for that situation, I would never have been at the Fabrangen. I would have been busy, or I wouldn't have been able to make it. So while I have absolutely no idea why Hashem runs the world, why I'm in this situation, why we're all in this situation, why Hashem does what he does, I'm grateful that I have the Rambam with me now, please God, forever. I know that this situation is not going to be forever, but at least I have the Rambam to take with me forever. And I bless myself and I bless all of us that through the Rambam, we're able to strengthen our Amunah, strengthen our connection to God, strengthen our connection to the Rambam, strengthen our connection to the Rebbe, who learning the Rambam was very important to, and strengthen our connection to each other, because when we're all learning the same thing, we're all united, we're all connected.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dan, for those heartfelt words, sharing with us the amazing life of the Rambam and the lessons that we can take from it. And thank you for helping us understand how the world sees the Rambam medical world. And also for sharing your personal sentiments, and hopefully all of us can take out of this evening a hachlata like you took out of that regular. I'd like to now call on Rabbi Tuvel to share with us a few brief words of his experience.
In this book, it says here in Yoim, every person must know that Hashem, through his little providence, gives him the ability to bring his better will from potential state to the actual down through. Hashem, this guy, always right on place, on the way up as Siyum Harambam, something better than Rambam, no matter to what you say, something that's very clever. Most people are learning and saying it every step of it. When you at night, the last thing at night, like myself, we're playing catch up. It's crazy, and that's one thing that we need to, to have every single day, no matter what, to work on so to bring Hashem down. And the Rabbi Zvi Telsner we saw in the video earlier was pretty amazing. It definitely hit home. I think it's going to have, the first Siyum that they did the 80s, that the Rebbe was very into getting, coincided with the Rambam's 850th birthday, and the Rebbe was pushing to have the shul in front of the Rambam was to make the Siyum Harambam. Historically, it's pretty crazy considering about all that why Israel lost the map and the fact that I did have like a Siyum Harambam, which was this novel learning ideas back again, and to have that in Paro was pretty incredible. Even more incredible that you took that sort of a year or two before the president called President of Egypt at that time, and I called in one of the what does the Rebbe want to read? Why is this Rebbe like harassing me? But as the video goes on, they actually were over 100 security convoy, and they did up the shul there beautifully, and they Siyum Harambam in Egypt, which is like it's pretty incredible considering, I guess, the history until not that long ago that it wasn't the friendliest place to bring into being. I only myself, it's relatively a Rambam voice, like He's like, say, this is listening. Tishba, and something trying to get but since then, and function has been going well, and I guess it's started like stacking them. I'm actually it's all learning like once you layer it, what becomes, I guess, regular thing to do. It's easy to build on. It's funny if people maybe one time this say inspired and be like, hey, I'm going to do visualization properly, but whatever it is, it's sometimes hard to dive all in with all the inspiration. Over the weeks, months time, there'll definitely be days or nights when you're like, you realize it's 9:30 and you're like, I have a lot of Rambam to learn, and it's not always the easiest thing to read about all sorts of bits that are connected to a grade, that work to a grade, how that affects, and it can be very difficult, but it's if you persevere, the rewards are there, knowing that each day you learn, you'll never finish the Torah, but you finish it, and you're going to the Torah, and there's always, you'll finish it and you'll build on it. And within that, it's a year or 3 year cycle. You'll layer your learning, and it's incredible to learn. And only long class will speak on this flying bed, and then getting through the Rambam, and of course, learning it in depth, and trying to understand it. You look at like this Tumah and Tara, and it's like, how's it relevant to my life? It seems so like, I mean, unfortunately, some of them, and then like my mind switched for a second. So what we're living now, that's the way, it's not real. What we're learning the Rambam, this is real. This is like when Mishneh Torah come now. This is our life. This is the life of the year, Tumah and Tara, and what you can eat, what you can't eat, and you probably can't shout that out. When somebody will tell you what to bring Tumah and Tara, but and I mean, this will come now. We'll have a lot of learning to do in these areas of Torah, but that gave me a bit of like, food for thought. That we're learning about. This is our life. What's contained in the Rambam. This is life. This is the life. Yes, you can already, I guess, live in that learning now by learning with the Rambam. Learning it, and it's successful. But this is very confusing, but they've done it really well. So it's really like from Patan Gadol, it's accessible. It's I don't want to say it's easy, because we have to push ourselves, and it's definitely very fulfilling. Learning and making from Broh that they should basically in the learning Rambam, getting more that it's got next year. We'll have an open flow, and everyone and it should be what the Rebbe wanted. That's his way of getting us ready for the times. Yeah, learning Torah.
You know what you said.
Thank you very much for the quiz and showing us how to grow around. This is practical and try to each and every single one. I'd like now to ask Rabbi Zvi Telsner to share with us a few brief words on his experience learning Rambam.
You haven't heard me speak yet. I don't think you should clap.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the organizers today. Quite special to be part of a big event. I was talking to someone this morning, not Sydney, but I was talking to someone this morning about events. From my childhood, growing up in Sydney, and it's quite a change. That's large events like this. Actually, we have them very often, and we're going to continue. But it really is quite special to be here. So when someone to the classical one called me a week ago and asked me to speak, obviously you can take it back, but it's an honor to be speaking. And the way that I suppose I want to raise questions like this, can you share something personal about your connection to the Rambam and why you every single day, as he said, whether it's at 2 a.m. when you've got to do Rambam for the day, so you get up and you do it, or it's first thing in the morning, whatever your schedule is, why is it so personal to you? You feel so connected to the Rambam and learning Rambam Torah. So when I was thinking about that particular phrase, it brought me back to something which hopefully is relevant to at least half the crowd. We've got a big audience from YG, we've got people even younger. But I was sitting in a bringing, as one does every Thursday, but it's the same. My day was usually every Thursday in YG, and I was talking to a particular Shia, and we were discussing, we as Bochum, thank God, we get the opportunity to sit and learn the entire day. But often, there's times after Seder, you want to learn a bit more, and you want to be inspired to do that. So how do you inspire yourself to do something extra? So at that point, I wasn't learning Rambam, any particular structure, put it that way. So that particular Shia said, why don't you start learning Rambam? And I said to him, and I was saying to myself, really, to take on learning Rambam, I feel is like, something which is big. It's a big ask to do. And at that time, I didn't think, I have to learn. There's nothing against anyone. I think the rule is, for me, I was like, I only want to learn the program, and that's all I want to do. So anything less, I didn't want to do it. So the Shia said to me, you'll start, and you never know where it will end, whether you do it every day or not. Just have the audacity, I suppose, is not supposed to actually start and do it. So I did. And a few weeks later, sitting in another bring-in, and we were talking about things that we've done over the last few weeks, month, whatever it was, and we were discussing, what we learned, and we were discussing Rambam, and I turned to the same Shia and I said, first of all, thank you for, I suppose, coercing me to start learning, but I said to him, unfortunately, I don't know if I'm so inspired to continue to learn. So at that point, he said, I want to take on to learn something else. I said, what can I do now? So I already spent half an hour learning. So he said, it's not that much, something small, and you can do it every day, and it's very easy. So I'm assuming it's the same route, our little route from YG to Denver. Got a mikveh every morning. He said he has a little card, and you can learn Tanya, which is very simple. I'm sure a lot of people in the room are doing that anyway. And he didn't know at the time, but there was one phrase that the Alter Rebbe puts in Tanya there, which always stuck with me. And to paraphrase, because I'm going to get it right, we have an obligation, I suppose, the Alter Rebbe doesn't mention every day, but we have an obligation to think about Hashem's malchus, and think about the awe, and we have to be misquoted in the awe and the fear of Hashem every single day. And with that, Hashem, you'll be able to daven properly. You do it every day. We say this, davening every day to be inspired and to go into the day, whether you're doing business, working, or whether you're in school and you're going to be inspired for the rest of the day, to go with knowing that you've davened properly, with having Hashem's fear and awe above you. And so, the obvious question, as I said to him on that time, is what in the world is Rambam? So he actually didn't have an answer for me. But I was thinking about this exact thing when Rabbi Lowenfeld told me. And what does it have to do with the Rambam? Good question. So when he told me to learn that, obviously I don't think he actually thought it anything to the Rambam, but when I was thinking about it over the last week, something I suppose profound came upon me. And that is, if you think about it, and I do this every day when I go pick up the Rambam, there are volumes. And when you look at something tangible in front of you, I suppose you get to understand the godless of Hashem. So we say this in Perek Malach every day, to know, to have the malchus and the godless of Hashem every day, and have the fear upon you, that awe upon you. But it's not very, for me, I should say. For me, it's not exactly the most tangible thing to say, I've got the fear and awe of Hashem above me, now I'm ready to go, venture out into my day and make some sales, whatever you do in that day. So, as I said, you stand in front of your bookshelf, you take that sefer off the shelf, however the Rambam broken up, or whatever story you learn from anything, you get to see that there's physically something in front of you. So for me, I'm learning from a set of Rambam that have 9 different Sfarim. But the idea was, we've got these 8 Sfarim, which are made up of the entire Torah. The Rebbe said many times, everyone else who spoke today said the same thing. That the entire Torah is made up, the Rambam took the entire Torah and codified it. At least in a way that we can all learn, no matter which facet of the world of learning that you're capable of doing. There's one more thing. So, as Dr. Tan eloquently said, and all of the speakers before, Rambam codified many, many things. And we take, I think, for granted the fact that we have supercomputers in our pockets, and we can go look up any Mepharsh we want, we can go look up any translation we want, without even blinking an eye. manuscripts. He had tons of different from all different books of the world. And he himself took all those things and codified it in a tangible way for us all to understand. I mean, from some of the things I looked at, roughly 10 years to create the Torah. 10 years is a big chunk of time of your life that you spent just doing this one piece of work, not to mention all the other things that he accomplished over his life. Where for us, potentially, if you had all these things in one set, you look up and off you go. So when you think about it, it's actually taken a vast amount of knowledge and codified it for us all. And for me, that was the thing which was most personal to me. Yes, all understood very accessible to us. Rabbi in his school has made sure that we're all capable of learning some form of Rambam, whether it's split from by one parak or say from mixes. But the fact that it's available to you and you can actually see the greatness of what the Rambam did, plus through Hashem, it's quite remarkable. So for me, I think that is one thing which will always stay with me, and it has led me to continue to learn Rambam ever since that love for bringing 16 years ago now. And on top of all of that, I think it's great that it's actually a connection for us with the Rebbe itself. Because obviously, you'll know when you learn the Rebbe's Torah, we are connected to him and all other Rebbeim. But often we don't have all the time in the world to sit down and sit us every day. But at least we've got a bullet from the Rebbe to go. If you learn Rambam every day, that's something to connect with all of us together collectively as a Chassidim, but also the Rebbe himself. So I'm going to say, Broh of all of us, we should think to learn and think to grow, and let's just have a much bigger event. Thank you very much, Rabbi Zvi, for those inspiring words. 16 years strong, that's pretty good, impressive. Actually, someone in this community confided in me that for over 30 years he has not gone to sleep before finishing 3 Broh and Rambam. And thank you for also mentioning that, again, that it's accessible to all. The Rebbe made Rambam something that every single Yid should be part of. And Noshim, the top. So there's 3 Brochim, there's 1 parak, there's 6 Brown mitzvahs, but this is something that the Rebbe wants men, women, and children to be part of, so that all Yid come together as achas. At this time, I'd like to call up Rabbi Leor Broh to make the Siyum of the 41st cycle. The Rambam in Hilchos Menachem, in the last halachos, writes that in the days of Menachem Mashiach, when his kingdom will be established, and all the Yidden will gather together, they will relate to him, he will relate to them with Ruach HaKodesh. And it talks about what he will say. This person is in Yufas Kohen, this one is Yufas Levi. And afterwards, the Rambam says in the last halachos, Lo nisavo hachachomim, the last 2 halachos. Lo nisavo hachachomim v'navim yemos Mashiach. The reason that the Chachomim and the Nevi'im wanted to have the days of Mashiach was lo kedei sheyishvu b'al Kollel, not in order that we should rule the world. Lo kedei sheyudabak, or rule over the goyim. Lo kedei sheynaseh samam, and not in order that we will be lifted among the nation. And it's not just to eat and drink and have. The primary reason that the Chachamim were given for the days of Mashiach was Kedei Sheyu Penuyin B'Torah Master, the agreed living Torah and its wisdom. Well, here Lahem Noges and Vata, they should have no obstacle. Kedei Sheyizku L'Chaye Olam Haba, as we explained. Man, and at that time, there would be no famine, no war, no jealousy, no competition. So much goodness. The Holomardanim would soon offer, all the pleasures will be accessible like the dust of the earth. That the only occupation of the world will be simply to know Hashem. And therefore,
Yiyu Yisrael Chachamim Gedolim, the Yodim Devorech Askomim. The Jewish people will be great Chachamim. They will know hidden things. The Yasigu Das Boiron, if we will, they will understand about Hashem's of his even have. Shenemar, as it says, Ki mola ha'oretz deyas Hashem, Hamayim l'yom l'chasid. The earth will be full of the knowledge of God, like the wilderness covered the seabed. And with that, the Rambam concludes the Mishneh Torah Mishnah of this part. Kollel Broh she'amar v'yeh ha'olam. Kollel tam v'nishlam shevach v'el v'ra'el. Nigmar Sefer V'asar, this is the 14th book of Rambam completed. Or Sefer Shoftim, and it is a book of Shoftim. It has 81 chapters, and then the Rambam goes through the various chapters. The Rebbe, in one of his sikhs, compared the ending here to the way the Rambam describes what will happen in Shvias time in Hilchos Tshuva, which the Rambam himself made reference. If you look at the Hilchos Tshuva, the Rambam writes a very similar thing. He says the Jewish people were waiting and longing for Mashiach in order to be able to learn Torah. And then he says, because in those days there will be an abundance of knowledge. As it says, the land will be full of the knowledge of God. But there's no reference to Hamayim l'yom l'chasid. There's no reference to the waters covering the seabed. And the Rebbe asks, why is it that in Hilchos Nochum, the Rambam chose to add that addition, Hamayim l'yom l'chasid, but do not put it in the The Rebbe answers by saying that in Hilchos Tshuva, which is, of course, people who do Tshuva, the Rambam is talking about a time where there is a possibility for sin, where there is still a possibility for the Sahara to be active. It's not the ultimate time. And therefore, it's a time where, yes, all Haaretz Deis Hashem can be a lot of knowledge, but there is still the existence of Ra, there is still the existence of Tumah. It's the beginning stage. In Hilchos Malachim, the Rambam is talking about a time where there is a time for Mashiach where there will be complete rest from anything bad. There will be nothing bad at all. Therefore, he adds the words, like the waters cover the earth. You don't see the earth. You don't see, of course, anything bad. That's the time of Mashiach. The Rebbe also goes on to say that there are two times in Mashiach itself when it will happen. The first period of time of Mashiach will be where the world will be Olam Noihe, as the Rambam writes in the Shuvah Parakhet. The world will go on in a normal, natural way. There will be no supernatural events as such. Generally, supernatural. It will be Olam Noihe. That's the first period of Mashiach. The second period of Mashiach, there will be an incredible Kollel, of course, where the revelation of God will be so great that it will be to the extent that it will break and shatter the rules of nature. To see things which will dwarf anything that we've seen before in Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus of Egypt, as it says, "He made Mitzrayim, Aran and Elohim." Just wanted to mention that as we saw in the video just before, if you notice, there was a phrase that the Rebbe repeated several times. That was the phrase, "Sipsoisov doives bekever," with the lips of the Rambam moving together. You should know that if the Gemara brings down of Rabbi Zvi David HaMelech said a possible to him of Uro, Oilcha, Oilomim. David prayed, said, "I want to live in your tent, Oilomim, for both worlds." And there Rabbi Zvi said, after David HaMelech asked to live in both worlds, we always talk about the English expression from the best of both worlds, but how do you live in both worlds? Well, the Gemara answered and said that David HaMelech prayed that whenever people will say the words that he composed to Tehillim, his lips will be moving the Gashmis in this world. And therefore, whilst he's living in Olam Haba, he's also living in Olam Hazeh. The Rebbe was saying by the Rambam as well, that when one learns the words of the Rambam, who was the greatest doctor of his time and perhaps in the world we ever known, when you learn Rambam, you bring the Rambam into your home. You bring Gesund before into your home. And all those that need a reform will have a reform. And the ikkas should be that we should be blessed with that which the Rambam concludes his work with, that we should sit back in Yemei Mashiach now.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Rabbi Broh. Okay, thank you very much for that, Rabbi Broh. And there's a story about Rabbi Reichik, who was not well, and needed for Shlema. The Rebbe told him that the way to be healed, if one needs miracles in their life, then they should learn Rambam. Rambam is Rosh Davis, Revesh, Sefer, right. So as Rabbi Broh said, that the Rambam brings healing, brings Broh, brings bracha, brings haslacha, brings all the brachas that one needs. Similar to when we find in anyone who learns from Rebbe's Hebrews, sees that the Rebbe answers the question, but so often at the end of the letter, the Rebbe writes that you should be mechazik, the gimel shurim of Chumash, Tilim, and Tanya. And for us, besides obviously for learning chitas, our chitas of our Rebbe is learning Rambam, and that's obviously for all the brachas that one needs. I'd like now to ask Rabbi Telsner to please come up and do our soul on the 42nd cycle of Rambam.
Right.
Yes. Beginning of the Rambam, it's really there are two beginnings. Normally, the reason why we start at the beginning is like to do some Torah that we finish off with Zeis HaBracha, and after that we go into Bereshis. Now, really, if we want to start the Rambam as he wrote in the Seder, so introduction. In that introduction, he begins with something which is very relevant to this week, for the 4th to 6th Seder of Bahar. The beginning of Bahar, Rambam quotes the Gemara, Sinai. What the connection between it's all of a sudden Bahar Sinai. Rashi says, Sinai. All the different Torah clauses and brothers were given at Sinai. The Rebbe, in his introduction, the Rambam in his introduction to the Torah actually says the first line, all our mitzvahs, every single mitzvah that was spoken, Nitnel and Moshe, there's Sinai. Rambam makes it very, very clear that every single mitzvah, the Rambam later in the introduction explained how there's much but as Har Sinai is Rabbeinu was to cover the whole Torah from the beginning to end in one single God. But he gave it Rabbeinu was upstairs at the Har. It's of course showing us that the whole Torah was given to us in Har Sinai. Now the Rambam begins the beginning of Hilchos Yisrael Torah with the pasuk Mishoich Mazda Kol Yedecho It's Kosto L'Yisraelei. Roughly translated means bring, let us flow. Chazda your goodness and kindness for those who know you. It's in Kosto your righteousness L'Yisraelei for those who have straight up. The Rebbe says that the reason why the Rambam used this pasuk, number one, it starts with a man. You take a look at the very, very end where the Rambam picks up the whole Sefer. All it's there, Hamayim Layom Mechasim, with the Schlossmen, an end man. So the two men represent the Dikla the Torah and Pnimis HaTorah. The Rambam begins
with something which is very, very important. The Rambam says as follows. Yisoida Yisoidos, the foundation of all foundations, V'amud HaChochmos, and the pillar of wisdom, laid down to know, Sheyesh Shom Motzui Rishon, there is a, how does one pronounce it, Motzui Rishon? It's an entity which is the first. Umamsi Kol Nimtza, he's the one who creates everything in existence. Everything which is to be found in the heaven and the earth. Umasha, they name everything is in the middle. Loinimtzu will only come from Elo Me'amikas Motzui. This is the Yesod of Judaism. It's a Emunah B'Hashem, a total faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that comes before everything. Rishon Chok V'Yiras Hashem. The idea is the Maral Mikrag writes in Zakdoma to Birkei Avos that how they love the Torah. And many people who study Torah, V'Shochechu V'Noisen HaTorah. They forget who gave the Torah. It's not an intellectual exercise. It's a likus in his godliness. And the only way we actually absorb that godliness is understanding what the Rambam is writing in Leida Shekem Shomotsu. The Leida to know. Not Lahanim. The Rambam specifically is not using the word Lahanim, but he said the word Leida. And at the end of the Rambam, when the Rambam finishes, this concept that we will know and have an understanding and a comprehension of godliness, specifically the task that we have been born into this world. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help each and every one of us. And since the Rambam begins to train Yud Tevok, and of course Yud is what Chassidus says, the concept of bittul. When we do it by Har Sinai, the Torah talks about bittul of Har Sinai, the humility of that of Har Sinai, to learn Torah with that level of humility, keep the Rebbe's takonas, spread it, and then that schus will be Zoichet Sekilah Melech HaMashiach. Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Telsner. Short and very, very sweet. About Leida that we have to know, connected to this concept of Kaisai, where we're told that the Torah that we learn is Kaisai comes from the word of Hakika, where the words of Torah become absolutely one with us. So to Leida, we have to know Torah has become absolutely one with the Yid. At this point, I just want to thank those who were involved in organizing the program tonight. Rabbi Ari Schechter, Rabbi Moshe Rosenthal, and Yoni Johnson. And a very special thank you to our dear caterer, Sobi. Our guest speaker tonight, as a Bacher, was Zeichet to be once Russia opened up again for Yiddishkeit, he was involved with the Rebbe's instructions to open the very first yeshiva in Moscow. He's been on Shlichus in Sydney's North Shore for just about 33 years. He's the president of the Rabbinical Council of New South Wales and the regional director of the JLI in Australia. Many people in this community have been inspired by Rabbi Schapiro, Yiddishkeit, Chassidishkeit, and so therefore it's a great honor as supposed to introduce Rabbi Nochum Schapiro as a guest.
You have a lot of competition.
I could just make a request that the third electoral after the guest speaker speaks, and we can also make a request if the public could just allow the adult. Thank you.
That was an announcement. I didn't get one. Oh, that's what. I'll give you my phone. I didn't realize.
Sorry, just again to announce that we're standing up. There's more desserts coming out, but because the program is on a tight schedule, And we'll have our guest speaker now, while the desserts come out. And then after the guest speaker, everyone will be invited to have dessert. Please take a seat.
I'm Broh.
So, start at the beginning. Basically, Tanya, here, incredible community, Hush community of Melbourne. Siddish community, community of Afghans, community with great leadership. Thank Shliach of Chaim Broner, Kollel, James Johnson, guiding me, and continue to do community here, which has reverberations throughout Australia. Being able to be here and and so many evenings, so many visits, I don't often get an opportunity to be at. I'd like to start with I just want to ask Broh for Shleima for the names, and I'm going to say Amen. I'd like to ask the Broh for Hila Bas Yafa, for Patient Dreyer, Baruch Levi Tzara, Shrazan, for Leah Bas Chanem, and Kamel Mishomeza. Please say Amen. The Moshe Ham, 24.
Amen.
So I was asked to come and speak subjectively, as I was a Bacher in 770 or Shir Dalet Nolateda, when the Rebbe made the Keynote Rambam, give some perspective from the ground, from a subjective view that self-Bacher might have had at the time that the Rebbe made the Okay, why is that negay to give a subjective view? Have objectively exactly what the Rebbe says. You have it today more than ever, more than in our day. Video you want there, every sikha printed. They are such as was printed for tonight that beautifully so true. So many of the young that I've spoken about associated with the Rambam. We have beautiful talks here for the light on their subjective connection to learning Rambam. It's 9:18 at night. What do you need to hear from someone in North Shore City? Well, I guess you need public stuff. So it's sometimes you get one nekuda that maybe be helpful in one's own avodah and discussion. And for that, let me start to focus on off the topic. But something is toxic at present, because it's a letter that I found that really spoke to me and inspires me. Maybe I could share that with you, and maybe that could connect everything else. So I was learning with my family from all over the world, a 10-minute share, my children, try to get a time that works here, Israel, America. So we're learning letters from the Rebbe from after Tashiyud. And I came across this letter. And I don't remember talking to this letter beforehand, so I don't know if this is
such a well-known letter, but it really spoke because it speaks to how the Rebbe is present and communicates with us in our lives. This is a letter to the Mishneh Torah. The Rebbe says in reply to his detailed question. Now it seems from the question that he was marrying off his daughter to Shalom Ben. And the wedding was obviously going to be within the shleishim of the Friedrich Rebbe. That this Neman of anyone knew was Mekusher, the essence of the Friedrich Rebbe, Shaykh Zon. And here, he probably didn't know what to do with the wedding. How do you make a wedding when he's in such a haste? But today we know there's no even weddings, even they was full of that. This was then. It's much harder for people to get their head around making a wedding in that time. So the Rebbe writes there, the Fiani is 19. According to my opinion, Sameach is a chasam v'kala b'niguni chapad b'nei. Enjoy the chasam v'kala, chapad b'nei, etc. And then he gives him a bracha to him, a sameach, etc. Then he continues to say that it is known. This is what I found very powerful. It is known that I didn't see him. And especially I heard this about the Rebbe Parash. During saying the Maimer, he would say, million places, words that are on a stand on their own, just individual words, random words, the way we translate it today, that were relevant only to some people of those who were listening. A few people who were listening to the Maimer needed to hear those words. The Kollel and everyone heard only that was relevant to it. That is, the Rebbe would say words, people didn't hear it unless it was relevant. By the way, the Rebbe said, the Rebbe asked his father that he should hear all those words. This is what I heard from the student. So the Rebbe says like this. This is, I didn't see in the clock. This is what I heard from the Rebbe. Rebbe said, Amen, the Rebbe gave out, there are many Bashemske words of the Friedrich Rebbe said that a Bashemske word, and therefore referring back to what the Rebbe Marash did, responses to people's questions. The answer to the question that he brought earlier in the beginning of chapter 5, and certainly that the heaven, which he said there, and should relate it to the Chassan Kala and to all those present. What's the chapter 5? We get up speak about the dancing in front of the Chassan Kala. He gives a bracha to the Bnei Zug. This letter really expresses it so powerfully. How the Rebbe, this is in space. People were like the Rebbe Marash. Some people heard, some people didn't. Those people who heard what they needed to hear. The same way in time. The Rebbe said something, and maybe the Shaitai, we didn't even know what it was. But now you see it. And then it's mamish a message to you. So the Rebbe is sending us messages today, and that's an incredible explanation of the whole phenomenon of Igris. Rebbe Igris never wrote it to someone in faith, but the Rebbe put words there for you today. You open that Igris, that's your answer, your question, your dilemma. The Rebbe put it in for you now.
that to me is extremely invigorating. And there are many stories that bring it back, incredible stories that express this idea. Let me just share one or two. One story with my son came to Shlichus by us 3 years ago or so. And one of the things he took to be involved in a number of areas. And one of the areas that we got involved with was our camp. But that was like kind of a shite, right? When he came, it was kind of derech. Namely, it was the Hebrew school, the teenagers, and other such. The bigger Chaim, they do incredible work. So the camp was being run Ochra and others beforehand, and it wasn't exactly at the highest level. The first year they're doing a camp July, 3 years ago, July, winter camp. And I think there's the enrollments are very short. And it's a lot of work. So my daughter-in-law, now telling my son, after the first day, Monday's the first day after the first day, and she says that is this really what we should be doing? Let's put in time and effort in area, take away from somewhere else. This is really what we should be doing. She writes a letter, she sends it off. The next morning, she gets a WhatsApp from her mother. What was the WhatsApp? She received a message from a cousin of hers who just read, came out there, was minus of Kofshin and Aleph. Minus of Kofshin and Aleph, answers that ever gave in Kofshin and Aleph. So she received a minor. It says as follows: the Rabbi Menachem Schapiro, in response to the Heidah of the Psychic camp in Israel, the Ratzin, it should be Ba'atzlacha, the Pula and Shechet, when they suffer, underlined 3 times. And he's asked, is this your Shechut? I'll be honest, I forgot about the answer. The Shaita, Nochum and Aleph came on an accent. I busy with the camp, I forgot about it. So she writes to the Rebbe the night before. The next morning, she gets the answer for the very camp. The Rebbe sent it. And if we go with that perspective, there is so much that the Rebbe has for us that it could be in all different ways. Through someone says WhatsApp, it could be through someone giving you something from the Rebbe from years ago. I'm not going to tell other stories. It's remarkable how many stories about the Rebbe that Kefim Naveg is a new publication from the Hair magazine, new book. It has many stories, some of them mamish. But from the perspective of that letter, from this Nemeth, it takes on a whole different perspective. I remember the Shaita. As a Bacher in 770, I was about then Ferrari, now Shlich and Amfed. His grandfather was only after my pregnancy, he would come and tell me, when the Rebbe said this, that was an answer to my grandfather's question about that. My grandfather asked this, and the Rebbe answered that. So he would tell me that behind the scenes that everyone's standing to know. But someone who was Bein Yanim who knew what grandfather asked the Rebbe, was like, wow, now it's the same story that I'm not asked. So this is not only true in time, in space, in one place, it's true over the years. That's what it means, the Rebbe Kefim Naveg. The words are already there. The inspiration is already there, the perspective is there, and all we have to do is pick it up, know that the Rebbe is. So what was it like in Tafshin Let me give you, my subjective perspective. Maybe you won't see it in the magazines because it's subjective. Tashim Dalit is a time period between Yichidus. What I mean is, Yichidus stopped Tashim Beit and didn't really start the dollars of Tashim Vav. Talking about a 4-year hiatus. Focus of the times is Shem, is the Secretariat, is Printed Tanyas. That's the edition of that period. And one more thing, important thing. Take you back to 2 Bishvat and Dalet. 2 Bishvat and Dalet never spoke about the importance of printing kaiftzin for limit. And yeshivas should print kaiftzin. The Rebbe first spoke about it 2 Bishvat Lamed Aleph, and then said the famous part, it's time to einem and develop limit. And so this idea of printing kaiftzin, booklets and pamphlets, and literally books of Bilbulim and Divrei Torah, Yeshiva was very dear to them. Let me say this. Naturally, the Rebbe was about limit Torah. What was the Rebbe as a person, so to speak, for being Rebbe? Is Torah. That was his world, that was his life. Okay, a Yid. Stalker, Yisrael, as a being a Rebbe. But his nature was limit Torah. That was colorful, that was his whole life. Read all the diaries of that. For the Rebbe, that we should learn Torah, and that we should be London, that we should know Torah, was extremely important. Extremely important. To the extent, in a Sikha Pashas Mishpat Mental, Pashas Mishpat Mental, the Rebbe said, there's an asking Chabad who asked me, someone asked him if he sends his son to the Lubavitch Yeshiva, will he be able to learn? I cannot learn. And the guy writes to the Rebbe, I didn't know what to answer. Well, the Rebbe got quite annoyed. What do you mean you didn't know what to answer? How long did it percolate in your mind before you even asked me about it? So I asked him, how long are you learning that? I said, do you know on the Kochzik, about printing Kochzik? And what do you think it's for? He asked you a question. Did you ever open the Kochzik? No. You haven't yet. So why don't you open them? Open the Kochzik, open the booklets that were printed by our yeshivas, our Broh, and then you'll read it and show it to them and let's compare our Kochzik to what other yeshivas Kochzik are. That's what the Rebbe says. To the Rebbe to say, ask for Shalom, that our Broh are anywhere less than other yeshivas in Limit HaTorah was absolutely out of the question of it. And it was painful. And if you want to find the Sikh in Yiddish, find it online, have it here, especially in Yiddish, it's rich. You can hear the Rebbe feeling when he said it. Find the Sikh and read it there. This was relevant to us especially, so I took with Yudi Shutter, who was now in Garden, Pennsylvania, took on, and this was the Pashas Mishpat after the Mishpat. And we gave into the Rebbe of Kavitz for Ur and Cotton, whole Kavitz, Alateya, Pupulim, Bachim, Shashivas, and the Rebbe gave us a beautiful, beautiful answer. Skabel, Tachtach, and really a wonderful, beautiful answer for that activity. So, what's my point here? That the environment we're talking about with here, Limit HaTorah like that, is huge. In that environment, now the Rebbe comes up with a ton of Limit HaTorah. Now, It was a Rambam. Now, the Rambam, before Hashem and Dalit, always Rambam. To anyone who goes to yeshivas, this was Rambam. Rambam is the easiest way to make a film. Right? Some doesn't have a reason. You learn a shtickle Gemara, and the Shayim say this is the explanation, this is the reason for it. They look at what the Rambam says. Rambam says Allah here, but based on this Allah, if this is the reason, then in the next place Allah would be different. But why did Rambam ask him difference? That's your entry in the book. That's most of what she said, isn't that? So it was a great work for Rosh Yeshivas to make the full and to give to their students. All of a sudden here, they have to turn over. And you look at Allah and Allah. Allah, and it was in the space that they never cared about the most. The limit of Torah. So at the time, they never makes the Takana. First, it makes the Siyum Harambam in Yudalish Mission. It's already printed in the booklets. First, hear what happened in Morocco. Made the Mashluch in Morocco. And then the Rebbe speaks about it, but uniquely, unbelievable, never happened by any other mitzvah. At least I don't remember. The Rebbe says, okay, we're going to learn now. No, the Rebbe made a mitzvah. We're going to do this back. Yesterday, what do you mean? When do you start? Right away. So the Sikha Akish Pesach didn't say when. People started, opened the paper, started learning grammar. When the kids stayed in Holland, around the Pesach, and we were learning grammar. Then it was Thursday night, there was a Chiddush. The evidence said it's going to start on Sunday. In order to end close to the birthday of the Rambam, he went into how to do the Veda Shir. In every detail, he gave advice how to do the Veda Shir, what to do in Yeshiva, etc. So the remarkable, the Rebbe said, we're going to learn Rambam, but we're starting on Sunday. It was totally not the norm at all. Well, the Siyum Harambam. Dolphins. Starting on Sunday, we have to see the Dolphins. First thing, the Dolphins. Could have waited a few days and ended up seeing on the Rambam's birthday. No. We wanted to see him on Rambam. So one more point to this. When the Rebbe starts speaking about security, see him like a year later. They printed something that was unbelievable. You just kissed the Obama day, did ever make the Siyum Harambam? That was wow. It was like blew everyone's mind. Siyum Harambam was an unbelievable depth and clarity, incredible Siyum. They then gave it to the Rebbe to be Makiyah. The Rebbe was Makiyah. It was printed in a book, in a place in Kollel called Hamoyer. Many times things were printed in Hamoyer, not publication, but printed many of the Rebbe's in Yonah. Then they did everything at that time. Those days would go into the Rebbe twice. The Rebbe would Makiyah the second time, and then it would be printed in the booklet. The Menachem are waiting for the Rebbe to give out the Siyum from and the Rebbe would not give it out. The Rebbe did not give it out. It seems like there was something too holy in it that the Rebbe was not ready to give it out, then it should be printed. It was like the depth of Chassidus that was revealed in that Siyum Harambam was not ready. The world wasn't ready. Right before Siyum Harambam, the first year, that became 770. That Siyum Harambam, Tovshin Lamed gave it to print, and they printed it then as the unique purchase. You see how important this was for the Rebbe. It's a unique kuntras. And I remember 3 kuntras. My day is 70. Others could remember more. There's only 3 kuntras that came out colored back. Which were the 3 that I remember? I mean, 3 from the Rebbe. One was take from the Rebbe. My mother from the other Rabbi. Also, I'm talking about the Rebbe's here. There were 3 good places that came on the colored jacket. One was Hashis by Yigash and Zion after the Davis. The liquid of that wheat came out, the color that was a yomtiv publication. Second was Reish Chedesh Kislev Memchet, 10 years after Chedesh Kislev, where they came out with the publication of a Shapiro, the Shalom of Leisani, which is an amazing thing itself. Unbelievable thing to talk about. That is the mind of Shapiro, the Shalom, one of the ancient classics, very long mind, which they never said Memchet. Long story, which they never wanted to give it in. They thought, they never give them a gear. Anyway, they get tough shit. Don't forget, they never didn't take on the Shchedesh Kislev of the Yom Tov right away. It took time. 10 years afterwards, tough shit and Ches gave out a kundris, a colorful jacket, the Shakti B'Shalom they saw it, kundris Shchedesh Kislev, which was the mind of the test. Gave it out for good. That was the second one. Third one was this Hadron of the Rambam, Hadron of this Kislev that he gave out for the Siyum, the Rambam, first Siyum Harambam. Came out with a pink, purplish cover, and now it's printed everywhere like everything else. We're flooded with so many people. But this kind of expressed to me how important this was to them. Think about a couple of short nekudas about the importance of the Rambam to them. Number one, there was not one sikha, not to women, not to children, not to chidus, not to everybody. From the Brengen of Achim Shetayim, until Menachem, things changed in the sikha. There was not one sikha where the Rebbe didn't mention Akon of Limon. Not one. We had Rashi sikhas every Shabbos. Wasn't Shabbos? There was no Rashi. Only Shabbos was Rashi. But this the Rebbe took it was so important to the Rebbe that there was not one time he spoke and didn't mention this Akon of Limon. To the extent that in Kippur Memvav, the Rebbe says we could speak either about the Shir HaYomi in Chumash or about the Rambam. So Rambam takes precedence. Why? So the Rebbe is telling us this story. This is his takana. Chitas is very important. Chitas. To us, Siyum of the Rebbe, this is how we connect our mind, which is, of course, the Rebbe explained in Perikei Tanya, how we connect to the Rebbe every day, every single day. Even much of Tisha B'Av, there's not one day in the year where we don't connect to the Rebbe through learning Rambam. Now, one last section of what I'm saying. A few days ago, we had the Ayim Yoim of Eli Abeli. We did in Canada. The Canada said because the do case in mind, when you talk to someone about inspiring them in Beta, that what you achieved is unbelievable. So I was being a number of years ago. I was being went to the Bistro Center, and he was, measuring for a kapot. And Rabbi Yisrael started to tell me stories about Rambam. So he tells me, I want to tell you some stories. What are his stories? So first of all, he says, he has a friend that I wish I would daven in Kippur and I used to daven every day. This guy says to me, he said, his wife started getting these herbal medicine. He went to these doctors. The doctors said she has to take a whole list of medication, and who knows what the side effects are. Anyway, he's spent, she doesn't know what to do. I say to him, you learn Rambam? He says, no. I say to him, listen, I want to tell you a story. Someone went to the Rebbe. So different. I went to the Rebbe. Got paid for someone's house. I don't know about it. And in this, I see on the wall a big picture. I have to take up the entire room. And the guy says to him, what's your connection? He said, listen, I was married for many years. I had no children. I came. So someone invited me to the Rebbe. I went there, I want to get to the Rebbe. No, Rebbe, you're right. No. And someone else said, you know what? Stand by the elevator. The Rebbe goes with the mincha. Catch the Rebbe for a few minutes. You can ask him, bro. The Rebbe stood by the elevator. The Rebbe and he asked, "What? I want to choke in the bracha." The Rebbe said, "Do you put up children with me?" He says, "No." He says, "Do you want to put up children every day?" He says, "Listen, no time for negotiation. He says, no time for negotiation. You put up children, you have kids. Deal. He says, "Well, what happened?" "Hello?" 3 kids come downstairs. He said, "Go to the Rebbe. You make the deal. Say, you learn Rambam every day, and your wife should be better. And Kachama, his wife, for 7 years now, he's been doing Rambam and no medication. She doesn't need it. She's totally better." Another guy he said to me was, he's called some kind of sort mamish. His house is turned over. He can't stand his wife and kids. He can't. He doesn't have a particular his name. He lost everything. And the guy is telling him, and he goes to a place called Yaakov Taylor, learns there. Yaakov Taylor, shul where people sit to learn. So he says, "Do you do Rambam?" He says, "No." He said, "Don't take on Rambam." So he catches him at oil, and did it, and you can't believe it. All transformed. Loves his wife, loves his kids, everything he's gotten, everything turned over. And the truth is, this the Rebbe said is clean. The Rebbe said, that the achlat, just the achlat, to become part of Limud and Rambam. This is from by Yechim and Tech. Through the achlat of Hamaskim, what was there, HaKadosh Baruch Hu helped him, and he's zeichet to Sayat to Shmaya to be successful in his learning, with Menucha, Ubrius, the rest, and help. The guys need to be looking. As the Rebbe said, was mentioned earlier by Rabbi Hart, that the Rebbe's machla is the Peigimel. They're meant to be Peigimel machlis. Dr. Aaron will tell us they're Peigimel machlis, whatever, but they're meant to be Peigimel machlis. And by learning in Rambam, you have refuah. And Kachava, this guy. And one last one. I'll tell you one last one. I spoke to him today to ascertain this story. I'll tell you his name. He was a teacher of mine. So it's good to hear you, and you have direct from the person himself. The Zusha Feldman. Zusha Feldman was very sick, to the extent that Yisrael Shem tells me I was going around trying to see if I could get him life insurance before it's over, because it's out any day. So and Zusha Feldman then writes to the Rebbe. This is what the Rebbe writes there. Told me this virtual word today. This is in the men's. Amen. Well, the Rebbe said to him, Yume Rambam v'chitas. Kudim Hashem, studied in science today. The mitzvahs of Hashem are righteous. They bring joy to the heart. The chal v'chitzai come in surviving v'chitas. And all the results that come about, if you're Mesamchei Lev, as it's understood, Ashkenaz Hasid, behave as Lachelada, Vivasset. So Shetalman is still Baruch Hashem running around close to 40 years later. That's Skula that Rebbe gives us by connecting to him, learning the Rambam. Of course, to connect to others. The Rambam, that Rebbe said, David, like David McKevin. But of course, for us, Siddur, the most important thing is that this is a way for us to have discussions with the Rebbe. Maybe we say that to strengthen our discussion. The Rebbe will bring down upon us all, including ultimately the ultimate bracha. Like Ula Amitis Vashlema, the Rebbe is scholar, Gael, each and every one of us scholars.
Thank you very, very much, Rabbi Schapiro, for this heartfelt, warm, inspiring words. And how the Rebbe finds a way to lead us. Each and every one of us have our own experiences with that. The importance of Limud Rambam, and as we prepare the Kabbalah Mashiach continue, is obviously so central to connect with the Torah. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you for all of the inspiring speakers. Everyone, please remember to make a Broh. There will be a iron in the back. In a couple of minutes. Serve whoever would like to serve. Everyone, please feel free to take a tour home. We got permission for the day here for your shoe with a friend and take Rabbi Johnson for time.
Yankee. I